Blasterthon, night 3, and there's also a performance tomorrow night at the Eaton building, which will be, I think, also very good with Ishvan Cantor, Monty Canson, Amen, and Rick Royer, and my group Geodesic Gnome, and other things. So I want to just tell a couple quick stories about Blaster and then read one quick text. So Blaster, Al Ackerman moved to Baltimore in early 90s, and 91. This is, by the way, this is tentatively convenes my fact checker, lifelong fact checker. I'm a little loose and groovy with it sometimes. Anyway, so when Blaster moved here, he lived initially with me, and then after about 4 or 5 months, he lived with Rupert, Wondlowski, and some other friends in a place called the House of Wigs. And he had been on the road. He had been, I think, come directly from Crowbar Nestle, one of the great welfare cheat and drug dealers of all times, place in Jack City, New Jack City, and he arrived in Baltimore in a pretty strange state. And it was a particularly, like, the early 90s in Baltimore were a particularly severe time. Baltimore is always a dangerous place, but it was a really dangerous place at that time. And Blaster fell into a pretty hard partying group, not so much myself, but some of the other people that he was living with. And so there were a couple incidents that kind of stuck out. One was that Blaster, one night there had been a lot of revelry going on, and Blaster had been drinking a fair amount, and he walked up to the second floor of the House of Wigs, which was basically just a little dingy row home, except that it had wigs nailed to the hallway on the second floor. And somehow he managed to fall over the banister from the second floor, which meant that he fell from a height, he like fell over something that was maybe a little bit lower than the height of that bar up there, flipped over it, and this was, I don't know how old he was at the time, but he certainly seemed like a somewhat frail person at the time, and landed flat on the ground, and a bunch of people saw this, and then he just sort of picked himself up, and he was okay. And it was just a very weird thing, like nobody who saw that could ever really quite forget it, because it was such a dramatic fall with no consequence, presumably because of maybe he was so drunk that that he was really, really relaxed. During that period when he lived in the House of Wigs, there was another character who was a lot less beloved than Blaster, who moved in and became kind of Blaster's nemesis. He was also kind of a traveling older guy. His name was James Diggs, and he was an ex-Army colonel who had basically, Air Force, excuse me, thank you, fact checker, who was anarchist Air Force colonel. And James was about Blaster's age, and he had gone native during Vietnam, I believe, taken a lot of LSD and had a lot of really utopian schemes, and he was kind of the total opposite of Blaster, because where Blaster was very like cynical and inward and literary and sophisticated and perverse, James was just, he was perverse, but he was not in a self-aware sort of way. He was kind of like a jibber-jabbering old hippie who just would never stop talking, which was probably Blaster's ultimate horror. And I would sometimes come into the House of Wigs, and Blaster, who had been kicked out of the main bedroom by James, would be really, really grumbling around and really upset, because James would be in the kitchen doing this thing that he did that Blaster hated, where James would sit in his tighty-whitey underwear, and he would be making little tiny pork sandwiches in the oven, and he would have them all lined up in the oven, and he would be cooking them in the oven with the oven open and like the red heat, you know, pouring out on him, and he'd be there in his underwear. And I'd come in, I used to come in like unannounced all the time. I used to actually go there to eat cheese ravioli, and in fact Blaster wrote a long story about how much weight I gained from the cheese ravioli. called Puffy Treats, which is actually going to be the subject of some work tomorrow by Tom Borum. But anyway, so I would come in and Blaster would be there and James would be there, and Blaster was so, like, his comments about James were unbelievably, acidic and, bitter, and, there was James in his underwear poking at these pork sandwiches, and Blaster would just pull me aside and say, he's a fool. But the other thing that happened around that time, which I'm glad Blaster survived, was that he and Rupert Wondlowski were walking home from the rendezvous one night, and they got jumped. And again, this was notable partially because Blaster, at that time particularly, seemed really frail. They got jumped by a mugger who actually hit Blaster in the head with a blackjack and knocked him out. And it was kind of an intense thing for all of us, but he recovered really quickly. I don't even think he had a day of downtime. But for that reason, Rupert's always said that Blaster took one for the team for him. So anyway, those are just a couple stories, reminiscences of early life of Al Ackerman in Baltimore that I forgot to mention on the first night of the Blasterthon that have somehow stuck with me. I want to read a text, or as much of it as seems appropriate, since we have Istvan Kentor, the Prince of Neoists, with us tonight. I want to read this text that Blaster wrote. This is from a book called A Neoist Research Project, which I consider to be one of the more definitive books on Neoism. A movement which Istvan is certainly the world's greatest proponent of, and that Blaster has always been associated with, and you'll see here his contributions to its theory. I'm actually going to get some glasses. Hold on. This is so I can see the facts more clearly. Ackerman, 4/16/96, 4:28 a.m., Neoism 101 Supplement, 36D. The first myth of Neoism is that it exists. Neoism is sometimes used as a word. Neoism is the rattling of a stick inside a full cavity search. Neoism, for all those times that you don't need a full pot. What flavors Neoism you got? The pink and blue enamel booths of the Automat drugstore were full of Neoists, chattering feverishly, mostly about a vast afterlife and jet copters. A Neoist elder takes 2 bricks from his purse, and see, instantly, the camel springs right up. There is little unpleasant that can't be made longer by Neoism. Firm for their large size. Neoists are the blessed chloroform of the mind. Not all that breed in the mud are Neoists. Sessed up and misled by a duppy, Neoist scribes and every sentence with the word tooth. Only a gink would alphabetize. Don't accept rides from strange Neoists, and remember that all Neoists are strange as hell. The Neoist's brain was wet. At least important areas of it were wet to an inordinately disabling extent. Yet he was not far from being an idiot. Neoism is speckled, and vice versa. And I ask you, of what use is Neoism, if not to replicate the emotions engendered by the sight of a hair mat on which stands a tall glass but recently emptied of its buttermilk? It was easy, I said. Neoism gives everyone the right to be his own parthenogenesis with regard to the eneric primacy of gathering the fur salts. Dark as a Neoist with a prune. The terrible beauty of a neoist wearing the big purple Edgar Allan Poe head, topped off by a Chicago Cubs cap. Any neoist who cannot keep his different code writing styles separated in his own mind must have no mental ability to absorb and catalog facts whatsoever and should be flogged, then placed in an Iron Maiden, etc. Sorry, I don't know why I think this is so funny. The neoist's eyes moved up the uniform, exploring small pink revealing gaps along the way. Fallopian love or a chicken on a leash. Get it on, while the neoist with the shaved head wearing the ankle-length red coat is seen twice as your head melts. The first neoists went striding along the dusty roads, exorating the masses and shooting rays from their astonishingly prick-like fingertips. Like Shakespeare's infinite Hazlitt, neoists resemble all men in the world as well as themselves, and all talk at the top of their lungs all at once. Else, what's a Tower of Babel for? I collected a bunch of skulls and bones and boxes of bones. Stemportis, feverish neoist sinus cleansings. Lots of great garbage on Monday. Through the water, neoism is studied by those who have recently drowned. Leopard-spotted bath towel, worn as a cape with clothespins stuck between the fingers to simulate claws. In parentheses, Holmes' advice to burnt, close parentheses. The headline, JFK alive in Geneva Hospital, is like a neoist hoping to look pretty in a pink sundress. However, neoism has one good idea, the idea that there's a radioactive, I'm sorry, I apologize, I should be able to read this straight. The idea that there's a radioactive man loose in the city. However, neoism has neoists, neoist antonym for most of this group and part of this sandwich who, save for a vague gurgling sound, were silent. Kirk Douglas is the ideal neoist. Two neoists whistle something unseen, and then all three wrestle. It may be a neoist, but I'm also a box of bucksite. Amoral moles. A neoist remembers bourgeois capitalism by the rotten, irresponsible way as, without knowing the details, he minces forward, hand on hip, resorting order to the rapid-fire blurb, parenthesis. He used 2 radishes to feed his brute cravings, close parenthesis, with their promise of cheap radiatives and tawdry but painless stopovers to indicate a route. Neoist dog of a neoist. Monty Canson is a mushroom, unseparated at birth in an enclosure. Fool. Here are more neoist truths you missed. Neoists display flat, broad fuzz all over down there. Eats first, neoism after. But she blushed fitfully, in her arms and stomach as much as her face. Not that she was overpowered by the 2 great clodhopper boots, formidable mushroom-shaped furrow, and fierce danglers of this person, as you might imagine. Simply, she had not been prepared to meet a neoist elder at the chorale, parentheses, often attributed to Thomas Hardy, close parentheses. In the neoist patois, portus is spoken of as portus on the portisan, on the veal portus, and the stam portus. The destruction of the squirrel fly freed the word, robot member, which thereupon became conscious of pent-up alibis, wholly compatible, it seemed, with the sub-vocalized commands of Southern Baptist neoism. Davy Crockett's mysterious son was called neoist by some, and froggy by others. Neoism, like science or magic, is a likely source of monstrous beings. Now, not so much a consequence of attempts to create life as attempts to recombine it or modify brand to fail. Neoist project, 6 forms of disorientation because they're neoists. Not all people are having sex on the parts of the blind. Like beasts they were. It is a teacher, but also an oil man who hit the big time, and a palpably poor excuse for an owl. Everywhere we meet contradictions. The neoist behind the wire removed his accordion and rubbed it against the lapel of the 200-pound suit. We'll have to tie this down for a trip to town. No accident the neoist youth held their moment, slowing his emotions, wouldn't you agree? One happy neoist shaking out his shorts in the free showers equals 10 hundreds of angry little crab jobbers hitting the shower room floor. Every night before I sleep, I can take out my neoist patent leather shoes. But isn't it silly to imagine a heating pad could ever be as great as Monty Canson? Whispered by a neoist woman in Amsterdam as she was being bundled into a police van. Akademgarad is an okay place if you're an orange. You cannot hide a neoist in a sack for more than 48 hours. A neoist among sheep is sure to drop from exhaustion. Beware of the neoist witch with one nut. Again, to the scratchily recorded strains of a tortured gorilla, and approaching you at the precise level of your windpipe, the neoist's lower teeth are not followed by rosebud lips and a charming smile, but are attached to a yam tied with black line to the end of a stick being manipulated by an enormous ex-convict named Dave. Mount Rushmore is a sonnet to neoism. Neoism's crystal ball demonstrates on his nose. Neoists like to read about other neoists, not facts. I'm going to JoJo's for neoism. Thank you. Okay, so Megan McShea and Kate Porter.
So while Kate is setting up, I'm gonna set this up a little bit while I bonk myself in the face. Really pleased to be here. Really pleased you all are here. A week ago, sometime ago after Blaster died, I was going through all the things he sent me, and if he sent you things, then maybe you understand when I say the ratio of things he sent to me to the things I sent to him was like about 12 to 1. So it may sound surprising, but I found something I had never opened that he sent me in 2006. And on the back, it says, Tiny Special Snowflake Performance. And it has instructions: cut along the dotted line, hold over your carpet, shake vigorously. Hey, this is some fun we're having. That's step 4. Hey, this is some fun we're having. So anyway, I had never done this. I'd never opened it. And last week at Blasterthon at the cabaret, I read some stuff, and I actually opened it, not knowing what was inside. And I guess I can reenact it. And all these poems flew out that I had never read before. And so tonight we're going to perform those poems for you guys. Ride like the wind. With a gusty buzz, the vicar bled, and wires ran from him to an amplifier box, is in reality the story of an undesirable house guest. Face undesud. I want to make it clear that in spite of what is being written below, I do not contend that dog red hairs created enough weight to constitute a new peninsula, much less silence enough to govern your own barking, darkened lid. Evidence. Hips of Agent Pyle can symbolize he bought her out of hearing of the house, while one keeps hunting for a simple and natural language to express timeless night mice. And in that good spot, the spar of tinfoil was starting to get a mouth. But perhaps fate ups and hangs a hot bladder over all. A tremendous nurse, we thought, still on the boat, swept down on us. Or, to put it another way, Joseph Conrad never saw a streetcar until he was 58. Or, to put it another way, Joseph Fever Flavor, select no more than 5. Right, flame, sight, done, bunt, trance, bear, punch, twins, visitors. Call it a hobby. This rustling noise, the trail mix coming alive. It is. Gotta run over it with the car. Then I'm going to enter law school. Only I'll say nothing. And of course, I'll never reveal my plan to have a facelift. This is the 3rd time in 2 years, but I have to tell you, I could be superintending construction of a railway to a sugar plantation. Lots of them love their sugar. Know what else? Big swipe of turpentine will take care of that unwanted thing in your womb. See? It's over already. What really takes an effort of will is giving up the trail mix, living only on goblo bars and an awful lot of breatharian action. A virus doesn't live, doesn't die, doesn't feel embarrassed and having to quit. He worries about what he will say if the Lord asks, "Rolia, why did you not become Rolia?" He knows quiet desperation of a mouth near a shoe. He has few games limited to 2 persons, painted a soft gray. Sullivan. Mrs. Potato Head, with a slinky figure, is no way to describe a racehorse. bar. One dark green eye, one loud yellow eye, one blazing red eyebrow. Sometimes I cannot help laughing, but at other times a key drops to the floor, and I wonder if I should give names to the shadows cast by the creatures alive in my urine. Like the time I saw this grasshopper struggling to escape from the front of your sloppy mouth and named him Hemingway. Like the time I had this enormous boil on my butt back in '89 and called it Oklahoma City. Thank you.
Thereafter, around the same time, I got a mysterious postcard that wasn't canceled, that was pretty stupid, and it had a drawing on it of a character called Batworth, which I'd never heard of and still know nothing about. And then I was in Montreal in February of 1981 for the second Day3 Art Festival. I'm sure this mic is very necessary. And I saw a catalog from the Dada Festival in California, organized by Lon Spiegelman, probably at Monty Kansas Place, that had a picture of this bat duck in it with... How could I not be documenting myself? Do I look really good from there? Great. Oh, thanks. Do I look 100 years younger than I actually am?
Kind of amazing, but
Yeah. It's too dark in here. Anyway, so there was a name and address associated with this drawing, and since I was curious about who had sent it to me, I sent a postcard to a woman named Kim Messier, who may or may not have really existed. It could have been a completely fictitious person for all I know. I don't really know. So I wrote what was probably a very strange letter to this woman, Kim Messier, and at the time I was always writing the word the as T-E. So I was writing sentences like T-E, T-Ho-Up, T-T-Ha-T, etc., which most people found completely incomprehensible on stationery that was so rubber stamped with different things that it was very hard to even make out what was typed on it. So at first Kim Messier was somewhat friendly, but seemingly annoyed by what a strange person I was from her perspective. So I found our correspondence somewhat amusing, and I sent it off to Blaster, and I sent it off to Reverend Ivan Stang at the Church of the Subgenius, who I had just also recently gotten in touch with. And then Blaster and Ivan Stang both wrote letters to Kim. So, and I put together this publication which has both of their letters in it, which I'm giving out to anybody who participates in this event and selling for an outrageous outrageously high price of I don't know what, to anybody who's here who would like to have a copy. It was the first publication I ever put together where I published something by Blaster and by Stang. Well, actually, I published something earlier by Blaster, but it wasn't his writing. So what I'm going to do now is read you the letter to Kim McShea, who Blaster writes to as if her name is actually Kim, and he writes it under the name of Donald Sherman, saying that he's at what is implied to be a mental institution. So, dear Kim, no, I didn't find your address in FF and S. Thank you, Kim, more like that, thank you. Which is a zine where I normally encounter listings of other HTD devotees. Now, I should say that the letters that Kim were sending me were about HTD, which is Howard the Duck, which I also knew nothing about. So she thought that Bat Duck had something to do with Howard the Duck. Both of them were just mysteries to me, but I've since learned that Howard the Duck is some extremely vulgar Marvel comic about a outer space duck who has a lot of sex or something with humans. But I'm still not quite clear on that. And I don't care, actually. Anyway, encounter listings of other HTD devotees that I want to write to. Since it came from other quarters, I am all the more intrigued. I thought I knew most of the nation's HTD devotees already. Here at the clinic home CASFC, which will be explained in my movie, this will explain later, in the midst of a group session where we explore the way things hook up, I bump into this stupefying connection. Dr. A shows me a strange batwing HTD torn from some sort of art catalog with your name and address printed beside it. I just finished recounting one of my most vivid dreams involving HTD. Calling it a dream really doesn't begin to convey the nature of these visions. More like an instantaneous flash where between one step and the next, during the course of ordinary waking day, I experienced as if a complete story had abruptly popped into my mind. The whole thing from start to finish. Here at Clinic Home, where I stay till end of August, I'm encouraged to relate and explore these dreams. Never laughed at, etc. Dr. A said, Donald, this dream you shared with us tonight makes me think you might be interested in this. That's when he showed me Batwing HTD and your name and address. Now imagine me and Kim McShea receiving this letter, right? Genius. Anyway, every evening before going to sleep, and often besides during the day, D, that is I, would ask himself this question: would this Kim really want to hear my Howard the Duck dream? And finally, he took it upon himself to reply, could be. July 27, 1981. For Kim, dare to tell her. Can you not understand that these dreams are wound up in my mind to a kind of voice, a deeply moving control tone, almost a single long phrase that I must have heard at an early tender age, and that perhaps first experienced both song and dream, while staring at one of the framed pictures. All I remember of that picture can be expressed by the words silver diaphanous toga against the brown tones of an open grave. On the wall at my grandmother's house in Los Angeles, 1955, 56. Well, when I show inappropriate laughter, it means I'm nervous. Approaching the point within myself where this dream has prepared a niche. But the dream, as I say, it passed through my mind, complete, in less than an instant. A voice, this thrilling, nearly sobbing contrivance, was speaking to me, and as it spoke, I shall almost say, as it guided me, I saw and followed with the utmost absorption every detail of its recitative. I was in the clinic garden here, matchless sparkling leaves, a little sun-drenched grotto, a walking stick was making its way up the stalk of an oleander, when the dream struck, The scene fell away. There was only the voice. White Monet. You don't think I saw you, but I did. You didn't, recorder creature. You hear a sound over there, and something is there. It looks like an electric eye, shining and winking at you. You can't quite figure it out. Then you realize this is no electric eye. This lens, or this device, whatever it is, has legs on it. And this creature signals behind you to what looks like a boy in a bellhop's uniform. There's a little flurry of movement. It starts recording you then. It records your every move. Do you remember it? It's there recording every move you make. But your mind is clouded and you cannot, you no longer see it. It's a recorder creature. Can you understand that? The recorder creature has been there every minute, but the way it works is like a cathode. You won't notice right away what it's doing. It draws energy out of your body. It sucks the photons of psychic energy out. That's how it clouds your mind. But it's doing more than that. The whole time, and right in there, the whole time, it's also following you and working on you. Working in your mind. And right in there, it's implanting the disbelief. And you can't handle it. Committing a murder today without remembering it. You poor control thing. You won't even remember your Uncle Tootsie this afternoon when it's... And you went into his room. There he was on the bed with... Your Aunt Mary Beth is asleep there next to him. And they're both snoring. He's got his dirty old pajama bottoms on. And that's... But right in there, you get this feeling. And you turn to see the doctor on the porch. It's not the doctor you always thought it was. When you open the door, you see him standing out there in his white sports jacket, the red-faced man. Stepping out there, you hear him say, "Come down here." And he goes down the steps. He goes down the steps! When you get down there, he has this bundle in his hands, and you examine it. And this time he says, "It's for you." The point is, it's a package wrapped in plain brown paper. The package has this odor about it. But you have to open it. And when you do, you see something inside that looks like a squirrel. So there's this clear plastic bag with what looks like a brown squirrel's body coiled inside the plastic wrapping. "Oh, it's a squirrel," the red-faced man says. "That's not a squirrel," you say, and you throw the thing away from you down on the floor, and very slowly it falls over. You realize you're in the downstairs hall of a college building. It's some kind of dormitory building. You've never been there before. You're wearing a gunny pink robe, like a cheesy old dressing gown, with yellow crusty stuff spilled down the front. Crusty yellow clop. The girl with the brown bangs has... come out of the hall. You walk quickly away from her around the corner, where there's a door standing open. Your eyes get accustomed to the dimness. You start to make out a kind of metal table. It's a desk bolted to the wall, and you can begin now to see a gray bundle of feathers huddled there on the desktop. And then you can see that it's a duck with a little hat and tie, rocking there on top of the desk. And blinking. It's sitting there, rocking back and forth, and its red, sore little eyes are open and blinking at you. At that moment, the man behind the desk says, surely you recognize your friend Howard. Then he rips up the blinds. The effectiveness of it is not easy to prove, but here's what happened when he tore down the blinds. There is blinding white light pouring in at the window, and the tiny Howard the Duck on the table sort of falls over. There's a strangled croak out of his mouth, his bill, and he gives his feathers a shiver and falls right down there on its side. So you advance toward him. Howard's fallen over on its side. He's lying there with his eyes squeezed shut on the desktop. It scarcely registered on you because you've got your eyes fixed on the man, the creature behind the desk. He has this enormous toad head with two bright spots of rouge on each cheek. He's making wriggling snake motions with all his 10 fingers in front of his mouth. His mouth is open. He's opening and closing his eyes like a madman, and making these squirmy, wormy motions with his fingers. The next thing, you don't feel your legs. Your buttocks feel frozen too. Horribly cold and numb. When you look down, your buttocks feel frozen. You're sitting at the desk. The man's gone. Where did he go? A long time goes by and you think, where? He was there just a minute ago. Finally, the thought penetrates. That wet, your seat is all wet, so you look down. My theory is that this exhaustion is an association with past illness. It comes from behind the stars. You open your mouth. You open your mouth. You open your mouth. If you're guilty, it makes a sound like this. That dream, more personal ones having to do, no doubt, with some of my inmost feelings, of something that I most love, though I know that HTD bores or puzzles almost everyone else, has made me write to on the letter. You have only your exquisite Batman duck to blame, your drawing, and be assured that you tempted me. Your darling, Donald A. Sherman, Secretary, Harry Bates Club, at Clinic Home, 2623 Southeast Belmont, Portland, Oregon, 97214, till the end of August. That same text will be in the movie, but it will be recontextualized. And it's a good thing that you've got to go through it at least once, so that it'll be a little clearer when you experience it in the movie, since the movie will, of course, explain everything. Thank you.
Mail art and inscrutable scribblings. I'm going to, by the way, I also, I have drawn a series of comic books based on Blaster's Stories of the Late Master. So that's how I know. I'm going to read a couple of pieces. One from a TLP he published many, many years ago called Moonhead News, number 79. I believe all issues of Moonhead News are number 79. But this one is dated May 4th through 10th, 1988. This is the headline piece from that. Mr. Gnat and the Wobber by Moonhead Leonard, scribe. It has long been known that fish secrete a slick mucus as well as squirt ink out of their gills to facilitate their progress through the water. before we drop the subject of these busy little fellows, let's consider the boom in Mr. Gnat sightings. At least there is some ground for believing the many recent sightings you moonheads keep reporting of having glimpsed of Mr. Gnat, that glittering guy, so nobody need worry. According to Moonhead Lowe's, out of Cork, Ireland way, he is an adult. In good times or bad times, he is an unemployed man. Circumstances have prevented his attending grade school, but when uncovered, he has been found to contain an old loin and 27 pounds of Moonhead Rufus Smith. He lives in a doorway. Does the description fit you? Then you are Mr. Gnat, and our search is over. So, we can discount Moonhead Lowe's testacule. He has obviously never witnessed a Mr. Gnat in action. Moonhead Lowe's sounded full of fever. The real search goes on. But how? How indeed? Commencing right now, we are going to run as many epistolatory eyewitness testicles about Mr. Gnat as the traffic will bear. Necessarily, in doing so, we must perforce limit our selection to one epistolatory eyewitness testicle as has never been used before. Moonhead Bennet in Columbus, Ohio, is quoted as having said to one of his limbs just before he stretched his coat across it that his hand was in a hole in the wall. In fact, that it was like a light switch instead of his arm when he reached for you. Now, Moonhead Bennet is a brilliant speaker in the sense that the world means speaker, but he is worried because he has on his mind the fact that when he looked at you, something flowed on your chest like a shirt, and his wrist, meantime, was in the wall, still is. Moonhead Bennet is a brilliant speaker, but has lots preying on his mind and no hope at all of recognizing Mr. Gnat. None. We could continue this list for a long time, citing names and addresses of Moonhead elders like Moonhead Bennet, who had trouble recognizing Mr. Gnat when they saw him. I'm sure you could too. Things look bad. Maybe your mind falls into the same class as Moonhead Nestle of Eugene, Oregon, who in his horrified thought speaks the following testicle. I've always been interested in wars. Most moonheads aren't. There's moonheads who aren't, and there's moonheads who want to be let alone and have not only the Kamei Society, but all the little riffraff as their enemies. In this approach to describing Mr. Gnat, if this approach to describing Mr. Gnat seems strange, it's because it's the intelligent approach. For your information, Mr. Gnat is a partnership gadget, like Mr. Coffee. The only difference is you moonheads can use Mr. Gnat when you want to strain gnats in your own kitchen and make a steamy, satisfying cup of gnats in your own kitchen. But probably you won't. You haven't the intelligence. If this sounds high-hat, I don't mean it that way. It was fun to say, and it's always satisfying to watch people behaving like cravens, the way you moonhead elders like to believe you'd have behaved. I guess that's all. Moonhead Nestle, who handed us a whisper or two of the lowdown behind Mr. Gnat, claims to have used the wobber for the occasion. He told me how he used it chiefly on the subhuman denizens of Catch 'em Alive and produced about 5 pints of water per hour. But in line with Moonhead Kennedy's new directive, I've endeavored to use the wobber in a reverent and scientific way, he states, in a leg signal accompanying his Mr. Gnat testicle. But he still sounds like Moonhead Kennedy to us. Or should we perhaps say he still sounds like Moonhead Rain Chief? As most moonheads are aware, the wobber is so you can wrap a paper around your middle finger, push it up there, and then bring it back out slow. To quote the mighty words of Moonhead Rain Chief, Moonhead Nestle agreed with certain reservations. So saying, and ignoring the purposeful approach of a young, good-looking boy, Moonhead Nestle added a few twat words, displaying instincts of surpassing nervous intensity. And that bestial nervous influence could interrupt a sufficiently sensitive photoelectric beam. Nothing but symbiotic marriage between functioning and lurching will stop it. But there was no time to manufacture one. To be fair, we will need two of them. Both will undergo the experiment simultaneously, you to grow, it to shrink. Will you undo your belt and take a pill before you try? Gladly. Then I shall bring another wobber. And as soon as you weary of an endless conversation about fly peel in the bloodstream and foot racing, you will yearn for the rarefied heights of our Moonhead discussions. Yes, but it would be too late then, wouldn't it? Of course. Then the wobber is worse than my initiation into the Moonheads, which I still remember with revulsion after 27 years, said Moonhead Nestle. He told his story succinctly and refused to suggest sickness as a possible cause. Can you say the same of Mr. Ack? The second piece I'm going to read is a short story called Possums in the Drain. Blaster has written at least 2, perhaps 3 Thanksgiving stories, and this is one of my favorites. Possums in the Drain. This one is for Andre Stitt and Rhoda Mappo. Even if your religion keeps you from celebrating it, one of the worst things about the Thanksgiving season is the recurring pain and embarrassment of what dermatologists call Didelphidae dramen, possums in the drain. There is something about Thanksgiving which seems to bring these little omnivorous, largely nocturnal and arboreal mammals up into kitchen drain pipes, even in the most secure and up-to-date of American homes. And there is nothing quite so dim as staggering to the sink for a glass of water in the middle of the night and finding a possum sticking its head up out of the drain and looking at you. And if you keep cats and dogs, a possum in the drain can be an extra headache because when a possum is crawling around in the pipes, it tends to make a lot of racket, which keeps all the animals in the house stirred up. In our house, which was built around 1927, and where we have 16 cats, to have everybody milling around the sink at one time congests the kitchen floor terribly, leaving no space for me to practice my rumba steps or roll. I myself finally solved this problem of possums in the drains once and for all 3 years ago. I did it by using an old folk remedy a friend taught me. I recommend it to all of you reading this who have indoor plumbing, which means at least 35% of you if your editor hasn't been exaggerating the statistics he gave me. To begin with, readers who keep up with the medical news will recall that at Thanksgiving 3 years ago, I was suffering from a raging ear infection, a condition brought on by listening to my wife enumerate all 34 reasons why she was going to leave me. For this infection, the doctor had prescribed a painkiller, in the form of one of those sweet red syrups. Not a bad deal, because when you drink enough of this red pain syrup, you can sort of fool yourself into thinking you're just a kid in 5th grade drinking an elixir of codeine and cutting classes again. But the side effects, as I believe they call them, can be rather unpredictable. In my case, the quantities of pain syrup I was drinking caused me to become a trombone medium. What I mean by trombone medium is somebody telepathic who's able to receive spirit messages from the great beyond by means of a trombone. The way this is done, especially if, like me, you don't own a trombone, is by asking the trombone a question and then holding it to your ear and listening to what it tells you, as you would a seashell, trusting all the while that the message will be forthcoming before the pawn shop man tells you to leave. So, one cold and rainy Tuesday afternoon, about 3 days after Thanksgiving, when our possum was making an extra loud racket in the drains and the cats were getting so antsy they were about to drive me nuts, I slipped into Action Cash Pawnbrokers on 33rd and Belmont and asked the trombone in the window what I should do. Pretty soon the answer came back, entering my mind directly in the form of brain roof chatter, and what it advised me to do was phone my old friend David Crowbar Nestle, who lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and see what ideas he had on the subject of getting rid of possums in the drains. Now, in addition to being editor of 2 top family publications, Popular Reality Magazine and Highlights for Children, David Crowbar Nestle is an interesting non-entity in his own right. For one thing, there's the way his nickname came about. It seems that one day he got fed up with people constantly breaking into his house and stealing his furniture. So, as the cops weren't doing much about it, he adopted the method in retaliation of just going out and stealing it back again. That is, whenever somebody stole his furniture, Crowbar would go right over to the culprit's house, break in, and reclaim all that was rightfully his. He always broke in on Saturday night, always went in the back door, always used a candy bar, hence his nickname, Nestle, until someone suggested he might have more success if he used a crowbar. Crowbar, as I say, lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where the number of furniture thieves must be nothing short of phenomenal. I know this for a fact because the one time I visited him at his house, there was scarcely any room for me to move my limbs, and I must have counted at least 10 separate and complete sets of furniture. Room, 7 sets stacked under canvas out in the garage. All of which he told me he had been forced to reclaim after it was stolen from him. That this keeps him pretty busy goes without saying. So I counted myself lucky indeed that Tuesday afternoon in November when I phoned about the possums and was able to catch him at home on the 4th or 5th ring. A possum in the drain, eh? He mused when I had explained what the problem was. Sure, I know how to handle that. It's an old folk remedy. My Uncle Orton taught it to me. Well, Crowbar's Uncle Orton is known as the Red Light Vampire, and he's been locked up in an asylum for the criminally insane in Jackson, Michigan for at least 20 years. And hearing now that it was his remedy encouraged me to such an extent that I spent the next 30 minutes with pencil and paper, carefully taking down all that Crowbar told me. I learned the following. According to Uncle Orton, the way to rid your home of possums in the drains is, first, to stop by the supermarket and pick up 3 eggplants. Next, cut each eggplant in half lengthwise And using a needle and a length of strong thread or twine, sew the eggplant halves together. This should be done in such a way that when the string is tied around your neck, the eggplants hang down and back, forming a kind of loose, floppy cape. The mystic eggplant cape. The next step is to remove all your clothes and, wearing just the eggplants, climb up and sit in the sink, with your knees up and your butt clamped down over the drain. At this point, another person, the beater or helper, crawls under the house and uses a wrench to beat on the pipes. This startles the possum and drives it along through the pipes in the direction of the kitchen drain, at which juncture the exorcism is supposed to occur in some mysterious fashion. In some mysterious fashion that Crowbar wasn't exactly clear on. But he had heard his Uncle Orton swear time and again that it had never been known to fail. Crowbar said it was practically all his Uncle Orton talked about when he wasn't busy trying to break out of the asylum and drink blood. Needless to say, this method struck me as an excellent one, and I wanted to try it immediately on account of how the possum was getting on my nerves. The only problem, as far as I could see, lay in finding exactly the right person to sit up in the sink while I crawled under the house. Fortunately, when it came to finding exactly the right person, luck was with me in the person of my old army buddy, Popeye Sleaze Steve Steele, who was in town for the holidays. In fact, Popeye had been living on my sofa all month, selflessly putting aside his own career as a parking attendant to help make sure I never had to drink my pain syrup alone. When I got off the phone with Crowbar, I shook Popeye awake and explained the plan. He said, "I don't know, Kinkhead." He always called him Kinkhead. "In this weather, I hate to think how cold that rusty old sink of yours is going to feel." "Don't worry," I said. "You just have some more of this pain syrup while I run to the store for the eggplants, and by the time we're ready to start exorcising the drains, I bet you'll hardly notice any discomfort at all." So Popeye had some more pain syrup and I went to the store. Sure enough, by the time I was back and had the 3 eggplants cut in half and sewn together, he had stopped worrying about how cold sitting on the drain was going to feel. Once we had his clothes off and the mystic eggplant cape draped around his neck, the only problem became getting him up into the sink, since the pain syrup had made him loose as a goose. The big trouble was that while Popeye only weighs about 75 pounds, he stands well over 6 feet, when he's able to stand. The result was he kept folding up on me like an accordion, which caused his head to bounce up and down on the kitchen floor, further agitating the cats, who were already crouching and darting all over the place as a result of the possum, who went right on raising hell in the pipes. I was beginning to fear that my castle was built on sand, but just when all looked darkest, the boy who comes by 2 or 3 times a week to try to collect for the paper showed up at the door. I was able to bring him in and enlist his aid. "Geez," he said, stopping in his tracks when he saw Popeye resting on the floor near the cat's water, dressed in nothing but his eggplant cape. "What happened? Did somebody roll him for his clothes?" Inasmuch as we were already running late, I chose not to become mired in a lengthy explanation and merely told the lad not to worry, that we, Popeye and I, were a couple of 32nd degree Masons, and that my fraternal Masonic brother on the floor was made up to represent the Alcadama of John the Baptist. This seemed to satisfy him. Between us, we were finally able to put Popeye in the sink, knees up, butt clamped down over the drain. Thanks, son, I said to the boy, and the Knights of Columbus squared, thank you too. He left quickly without saying anything. Eggplant cape in place, knees up, butt clamped down over the drain, feet hanging over the edge of the sink, head lolling, eyes glazed, but able to respond to simple verbal commands. I judged Popeye was ready to play his part, and that the rest would be up to me. It would be cold out, I knew. So before getting underway, I put on my woolly sweater and had a little more red paint syrup. As I say, I knew it would be cold outside, so as a precaution, I had seconds on the syrup. After that, I finished what was left in the bottle, collected my flashlight and the wrench I had selected to beat on the pipes with. Then I went outside, took about 10 minutes to find the back of my house, and crawled under it. It was a moonless night and strangely dark under the house. Everywhere my light played, I could see cobwebs, cat pucks, old newspapers, tin cans, wet leaves, and glistening slugs. Broken toy cars, muck, mud, debris, and a pair of ancient red tennis shoes I had lost the previous summer. Their canvas sides mildewed and rotting. A veritable fairyland, in other words. And I must admit, I got a little hung up, drinking it all in with my syrup-heightened senses. Eventually, though, I brought myself back to the task at hand. I took a deep breath, hesitated, and then started crawling forward, hammering on the pipes as I went. The din was awful. In between clangs with my wrench, I thought I could detect faint sounds of the possum moving and scuttling before me through the pipes. When I judged he had probably reached the place where the tangle of pipes twisted up toward the kitchen drain, I stopped and listened. It occurred to me for the first time at that moment to wonder what actually might happen when my hairy little adversary with the needle-sharp teeth and razor-like claws reached the top of the drain and found Popeye's butt clamped down over what was, in effect, the only avenue of escape. But the time of wondering was short, for next instant the night was rent by the worst scream I have ever heard. Instantly I froze, while a horrible fantasy number unrolled itself inside my head. Terrible. For I saw myself having to rush Popeye's torn and bleeding form to the nearest emergency facility, where they were sure to be all sorts of questions and unpleasantness. Ghastly. You can't just bring someone to a hospital with his butt ripped out by a fear-crazed possum and not expect to go through a lot of embarrassing cross-examination. I felt as though at some point along the way I had made a slight miscalculation. But where? I spent so much time and thought under the house working out what I could tell the hospital people that when I finally crawled out and re-entered the kitchen, my mind was almost too overstimulated to take in what I saw. For my friend was sitting there in the sink, just as I had left him, without a scratch showing. "Popeye," I exclaimed, "you're all right." "Sure. Why?" "But didn't you just scream?" "Scream? No, I don't think so. Listen, Kinkhead, are we about through with this? It's getting cold sitting up here, and I'd like to get down." I could only shake my head in bewilderment. But if you didn't scream, and it certainly wasn't me, then who the hell was it? Editor's note, we'd say it was probably a toss-up between the possum and a reader. In the end, I never did find out. Another mysterious aspect of the whole affair was how the possum seemed to have vanished without a trace. At any rate, after that night, I never heard him in the drains again. I have been mulling the thing over in my mind for several years now, but not coming up with much in the way of enlightenment, and can only venture to guess that, one way or another, Uncle Orton's folk remedy must have worked. Anyway, all of you are welcome to try it.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with a short play by Lexi Mountain and Stephanie Barber, and then Tentatively Convenience's film This Will Explain. So good hang around. Stephanie Barber and Alexander Maki.
Well, hello? Is it someone's crazy drummer mom? Why did you steal my watch?
Who is it? Who's on the phone? Tell all. Joe? Joe?
I can't talk right now. My favorite CST and the Memphis Chicken Hawk song has just come on the radio, and I will no longer
Really
listen to
enunciate.
your voice.
Like a sponge, only grosser. Our love is a nub-like protrusion. And this old nub brings me closer. Am I you? Am I you? Is that my confusion?
That song is
Love
so
that song.
great.
Woo!
That song always makes me smile.
You know what I like about you, Slawleen? It's your ready smile. You have more teeth than most people. 47 and all in the front.
Blind cop, you remind me of Professor Hyman's noted tone man into lobster. Did you ever read that book? Professor Hyman kept giving people radioactive lobster drops in their coffee, and he would say, "Now we'll grow into a giant lobster." I like that phrase. Now
You will grow into a giant lobster. You will grow into a giant lobster.
how
You will grow into a giant
If I knew then, Susie, if only I knew then, what I now know, knowing what I knew when I knew what I didn't know now.
How much ecstasy have you known?
Well, me and locker room Johnny skewed off that nasal crust. What was your plastic wrap gland? Johnny up and bent.
I'm not trying to give you the runaround, Slawleen. It's just that it's not an easy thing to.
Why, Carl?
Why what?
Why no eye holes?
Well, I recently read an article in Playboy about men who were turned on by wearing lobster claws and watching box constrictors swallow alarm clocks.
Well, did you, Carl? Did you really read an article in Playboy about men who are turned on by wearing lobster claws and watching boa constrictors swallow alarm clocks? Tell me!
waving, but it wasn't you.
Yes or no?
No one is lonely while taking a puker.
Man eternal. Oh, wait. Turn up the radio. Hell yeah, blind call. If this ain't the Cantardell Hook hit, gentle on my sport, don't be a misplaced.
Oh, yes and no.
Rain or sun, we're rolling up and down. Display location in the heaving center. Lay down across the clamfold. Pressed again.
Yes and no.
Your swell
Yes and no.
buttocks, shirt and doos, spill my hair, it's streaming. Now tied tube above, cannot credit 20 arms with mouths in me like algolobotine. Known to many as your need. My tongue, long sky, brief nights, the words get tight, they squeak.
Hang on.
These guys will be back at the dinner theater next week for a 5-day run.